The first chapter of Genesis affirms the broad spectrum of the human experience, including gay, intersex, trans, gender expansive, straight, and cis people. We need to read Genesis 1 as a celebration and affirmation of the beautiful variety we find in human life and life in general, not as a restriction or limitation of what is possible in God's good creation. My name is Anthony. I'm a pastor of an LGBTQ affirming Christian church in Washington, D.C. I've done graduate work in theology, philosophy, and the original languages of the Bible. Let's dive in. The first chapter of Genesis is a brilliantly structured, ornately detailed, and well put together poem about God organizing creation out of God's good intention, not as an accident as other ancient religions believe. Genesis 1 is about pushing back the powers of chaos, the formless void of verse 2, and creating all that we see now. Now, something you must understand about biblical Hebrew is that it is a very terse, compact language. Something that takes 10 to 20 words to say in English could be said in 5 words in Hebrew. There's only about 7,000 words in biblical Hebrew. Koine Greek, which was used to write the Christian scriptures, has tens of thousands more. So, one of the ways that Hebrew authors would convey meaning succinctly is a rhetorical device called merism. Merism uses several parts of a whole to represent the entire thing. And we still use merism today. I lost my key, so I searched high and low. Does that mean I didn't search somewhere in the middle? No, of course not. It means I searched everywhere. If I think the song that I wrote will appeal to young and old, does that mean I think it won't appeal to Gen Xers or geriatric millennials? No. When I say young and old, I mean everyone in between too. So, Genesis 1 is filled with this sort of thing. God separates the sky above and the waters below. Does that mean there's no stratosphere or thermosphere or exosphere? No, there's sky, there's land, and there's everything in between. God separates night from day. Does that mean there's no dusk or dawn? No, light, day, everything in between. God creates and separates land animals and water creatures. Does that mean that amphibians are a deviation from God's plan? No. Genesis 1 affirms God's creative work and organization and the broad spectrum of creation from A to Z, aardvarks to zebras, and everything in between. So, when we get to day 6, God creating humanity, we would be profoundly misreading the text by suddenly thinking or expecting that the poetic tool of merism has ceased being used in this poem. We'd actually be shoehorning in recent conservative ideas about gender binaries into Genesis 1 rather than listening to what the text is really saying, which is what folks who believe in the authority and inspiration of Scripture ought to be doing. Verse 27 says God creates humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them, male and female, God created them, plural pronouns in the Hebrew. This passage does not suddenly become about affirming binary either-or ideas about gender, when the rest of the chapter isn't about binary either-or ideas about anything. Moreover, note what else is not in this passage that often gets read into it. There's no mention of marriage. There's no mention of a man and a woman pairing off. And just like the rest of Genesis 1 assumes there to be not just 2, but myriads, teams of animals and birds and sea creatures and stars, etc., we should also consider that God is not speaking to just 2 lone individuals, but rather the whole of humanity that God just created. So we shouldn't get the image that Genesis 1:28, that's the command to be fertile, multiply, fill the earth, master it, is God just talking to 2 people. That would be taking the story of Genesis 2, which is a completely separate creation account, different order of events that all happens in one day, not 7. Be taking chapter 2 and reading it back into Genesis 1. Instead, Genesis 1 is not a story about limits and thou shalt not commands. It's a story that affirms the full spectrum of nature and the human experience. So every LGBTQ person should be able to find themselves in that story. And no straight or cis person should ever feel the need to deny someone else's identity based on Genesis 1, unless they're willing to write off most of creation in the process.